wait for confirmation of that.
Thank you, Chairman. The recording has started.
Okay, well, thank you members for attending this virtual meeting of the Audit Committee. The meeting is being webcast on YouTube via the County Council website. All decisions at today's meeting will be reached through a vote. I will call for the vote at the appropriate time under each item, with the outcome of the vote read audibly by the Democratic Support Officer. I will begin by reading the names of members of the committee so they can confirm their attendance for the public record. So members, please unmute and confirm your attendance when your name is called so we can ensure you can be heard. So I am Councillor Alexis McAvoy. I'm the chairman. Councillor Dominic Hiscott, if you could just...
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Councillor Keith House.
Hello.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Kemp G.
Yeah, present, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Floss Mitchell.
Yes, present. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rob McCatter. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
And I understand you have to leave at 3 p.m. So
I am here.
Fine.
I do.
Okay. Councillor Tom Thacker.
Present, Chairman.
And Councillor Stephen Philpott, who's attending as a Conservative deputy today.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. So we'll go to item 1 on the
agenda.
Excuse
me, Chair.
Yes.
Councillor Mellor here. You didn't record my name there.
I was just testing. I do apologise.
What, testing if I'm
popped up.
Testing if I'm asleep or testing well anyway? Yes, I'm here.
I do apologise. So Councillor Derek Mellor, you're here. I do apologise. So if we go to item 1, which is apologies for absence, at the moment I just have Councillor Keith Evans. Do any members present want to register any other apologies at all? I think we are all here actually. Nobody? Thank you. So item 2, declarations of interest. If I can just remind you that if you have any declarations in any item to be discussed today, can you declare it at the time the item is discussed? Item 3, the minutes, which are pages 5 to 10. Would you like to just cast your eye over the minutes? And if any members have anything to raise, otherwise can we verbally agree the minutes?
Agreed. Agreed.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Nobody against. Okay.
Agreed. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Item 4 is deputations, and there are none. And chairman's announcements, there are none also. So if we now go to item 6, which is information compliance and the use of regulated investigatory powers, which is pages 11 to 20. And Peter Andrews will talk us through this one, please.
Thank you, Councillor McAvoy. This is the annual report on the County Council's use of surveillance powers. And as the committee members will see, we don't use those powers very regularly, but when we do, it's because there isn't an alternative. And for that reason, we're inviting the committee to recommend to the executive member of Policy and Resources that he consider the continued use of the powers when he comes to renew the operating policy in September, and that is recommendation 10.2. I'm happy to accept any questions on the report.
Okay, would anybody like to ask a question? I take it by the silence, everybody is happy with that.
Just happy to note, Chair.
Okay, the recommendation is on page 15. And if you're content with that, we'll all agree to note that. Okay.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Thank you. Right, moving swiftly on. Item 7 is the External Audit Planning Report on pages 21 to 64. Just pull that up. Sarah Croft, you're going to take us through this, are you, please? No response.
Hello, sorry, just hoping my camera's working okay. Thank
Okay.
you. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Okay,
So
thank
yeah,
you.
I will take you through what we have here to present to you today is an update of the plan that we presented in January. This is due to the changes to our risk assessment because of COVID-19. So what I'll do is I'll just talk you through where we have changed our audit approach. And then I can give you a quick update as to how the audit is progressing just now as we are underway in our year-end fieldwork. So if we move on to page 29, you'll see a graphic here that's got kind of a summary overview of our audit strategy. The top line there shows the new risk that we've identified as a result of COVID-19, and that is in terms of the valuation of investment property. Because of COVID-19, there has been an impact on occupation of buildings because of forced closures, and rental income is expected to fall as tenants default on their rents. In addition, most valuers are now including a material uncertainty clause in relation to valuations in their reports, which indicates that there's less certainty over these valuations and that there's more judgment required by the valuer. And that is due to the fact that there's less evidence to support the market assumptions due to all the uncertainty. Because of this, we have identified that as a significant risk. So it was previously what we call an inherent risk, so it was a higher risk, but now we have increased that risk again just due to the increased uncertainty there. There are no other changes to our increased risks that I want to talk through that have changed since the original report. So I'll then move on to slide page 35 in the audit pack. Sorry, in your agenda pack. This is again just talking through what I've said there in relation to investment property valuations. And what we have done is we have engaged our experts, our valuation experts, to assist in our testing of that due to the uncertainty. If I move on to page 36, this is in relation to pensions. So we've always had an increased risk of pensions. So it's just to note here that the volatility in the markets is likely to have a significant impact on the pension fund, and therefore that will need to be considered by the County Council. There isn't any change to the risk or the approach that we're going to take in our testing for that. If I move to the next slide, page 37, so we previously had IFRS 16, the adoption of that new standard as an increased risk. This adoption has now been deferred to 2021-22. Therefore, the Council are no longer required to undertake that impact assessment this year. There is no disclosure required this year. Therefore, we don't consider this to be a risk this year, and we will look at that next year. I move down now to page 41. This is the materiality that we previously presented to you. So we have reconsidered materiality. There have not been any changes to our materiality levels as a result of COVID-19. So it's just to confirm that to you. If I move now to page 45, this just gives you a list here of additional audit procedures that we'll have to perform in other areas. The most significant one is the fact that the audit is now fully remote, so we're not able to get out on site. We have been working well with the team on Microsoft Teams, and we're able to watch the finance team run reports, and they're able to scan and send us documents. The audit is taking a bit longer because of that, but that is not unusual. We're seeing that sort of across the board with all our audits. But it's just to flag that there has been that change due to the remote working. But the team are working well, and the finance team are being very responsive in our questions. The next page just talks through some other areas that COVID could impact, not limited to these, but just to give you an overview as to some of the other areas that could be impacted. The receivables, there could be an increase in amounts written off as a recoverable, holiday and sickness pay, changes in working patterns will be different, with people maybe not taking their holiday, taking it and then having the holiday accrual to carry over. And then of course we've got government support, which we know is kind of flowing out in tranches, which will have an impact on future years. That is the key changes. The rest of the report remains unchanged other than the timetable, which is listed on page 51. As you're aware, we're now expecting to sign off at after the September Audit Committee. But I'm happy to pause there and take any questions, or if there's anything that Kevin would like to add.
Thank you, Sarah. So does Kevin want to say anything, or do any members want to speak?
There's nothing I'd wish to add. Thank you, Sarah, for presenting clearly. So, but I'm happy to answer any questions the members may have.
Does anybody want to ask a question? Can't see any little hands up here. So if no little hands are going up, and you've got no other comments, the recommendation is on page 20. Oh, did I just hear somebody? Councillor Philpott.
Yes, Chairman, I did. Yes, I did actually. I'm not sure whether that's. It seems to be working my end, but I'm not sure if it's working yours. But
just popped up then.
Just a question, if I may, on the on pages 29 and 30, on the colour scheme that that's being used there, in terms of the change. What is the significance of the colour scheme? Because there doesn't seem to be any difference essentially in terms of, you know, I'm looking at whether it's an inherent risk or no change in the risk. I mean, that's being showing as a yellow. Is that a significant thing, or is that just simply the colour you're using, or is red there just to mark new risk that's been identified? Because the reason I ask is I would have thought that the valuation of land and buildings was an enhanced risk.
Yes, so the colour coding sort of the traffic light system, and red is to just highlight the new risks in the year. Yellow is if there have been no changes, and then if we had reduced a risk in the year, we would have had that as green, but we haven't reduced any risks from prior year. So it's more just to highlight to you that the new risk rather than the significance of that risk.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Phil?
Happy with that, thank you, Chairman.
Okay, anybody else? So no more little hands have popped up. So the recommendation is actually on page 21, and it's really just to note the report and receive it. Everybody content with that? Are you all happy with that?
Agreed.
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 Okay, thank you very much. So item 8 now is the internal audit report for 2019 to 2020. And Neil, that's on pages 65 to 86. So Neil, you're going to present this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes.
Chairman, just Chairman. Chairman.
Apologies. So this is the annual report and opinion for 2019-20. The report provides my overall opinion for the year, which can be found on page 74 of your packs, which assesses Hampshire's framework of governance, risk and control to be adequate based on the work that we've carried out throughout the year. Page 75 provides a pictorial representation of where internal audit resource has been focused over the course of the year. And there were a number of reviews, and they're listed on page 76, that have yet to be issued as draft. These reviews were generally scheduled for Q4 and have been delayed in the main by the impact of COVID through a mixture of service availability due to understandable competing priorities, in addition to internal audit's own adjustments to auditing virtually. However, I'm pleased to say that since this paper went to print, a majority of those have now progressed through to draft status. The bottom of page 77 shows in graphical form the spread of assurance opinions across the individual review areas completed, with a healthy complement concluding with a substantial or adequate assessment in just 9 assessed as limited over the course of the year. Pages 79 through to 81 provide an overview of some of those key observations that are coming from some of those limited assurance reviews. For 3 of those areas, I refer to management of guardianships, use of agency staff, and the approved mental health professionals reviews. The issues in respect of these are fairly similar and are focused around data quality and retention in the inconsistent recording of evidence. Now, I think it's worth just putting into context there a little bit. In each case, whilst we're not saying that relevant checks haven't been carried out, what we are saying is that there's nothing on the system by way of documentation to support that they have actually been undertaken, which may leave the organisation vulnerable if challenged. Pages 82 and 83 provide an overview of the reactive and proactive counter-fraud work that's been undertaken throughout the year, along with the outcomes of the latest National Fraud Initiative exercise, which identified £250,000 worth of savings from matches that were undertaken. I think that kind of draws out the key aspects of the report that I really wanted to bring to your attention. But I would just conclude by saying that from my perspective, I see this as a positive report and demonstrates the continued confidence in the organisation's framework of governance, risk and control. But more than happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Thank you, Neil. Would anybody like to speak? Yes, I can see Councillor Mitchell would like to ask a question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Neil, you picked up, thank you, for the point that I was going to ask you about, actually, around the record keeping and data recording on pages 79 and 80, and I just wanted to check, it's actually 79 and 80. I just wanted to check when you saw several apparently quite small or minor or well mitigated risks like this appearing in different departments, was there a way of picking up on a pattern that might indicate more of a systemic problem, and had you satisfied yourself that that wasn't the case in this case?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the way we approach it is we have various managers responsible for various aspects of the council and delivery of portfolios within different directorates. And what we look to assure is that those managers talk to each other in respect of any kind of commonality of issues or risks that are raised. And we discuss that at our regular audit management teams, and we act on those if there is a kind of a consistent message coming through.
Would anybody else like to ask a question? Could I just ask a question? I'm quite interested in the £136,000 recoverable from care payments. What went wrong there, and how did we put that right?
Sorry, I'm just...
That was on page 82.
82, thank you.
The last item.
The residential care. Yeah, invariably, what happens with the National Fraud Initiative is it's an exercise that compares data matches from a number of different organisations and a number of systems within the council. And what this would have highlighted invariably with the care payments are in issues or instances whereby a resident may have deceased within a home, but we've continued to pay for that individual through the care home in paying the care home. So it kind of matches a deceased list against our payments. Now, I think again the thing to note is here in the assurance that I can give the committee is that there are controls and checks within the council to kind of test and raise those issues as part of the control process. And sometimes the NFI exercises are slightly historic in the data that they're using. So we would have done a data capture to send off to the NFI in October, and we wouldn't have then got the results through of that until February the following year, and then we'll look at those transactions. Now, what the NFI require us to do is, even if we've identified that match ourselves previously, we still have to credit it on the NFI return because it's there. So a number of those would have been captured by the organisation already.
And the overall £250,000 savings, how long will it take you to recover all of that, do you think? Do you give yourself a time limit for that?
It very much depends on the circumstances of each case. They can be very, very different. It's not something I can give you a clear and definite answer on now, and it will be something that's followed up through adult care along with colleagues in legal.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else want to speak? No more questions? Now, the recommendation on page 65 is that the Audit Committee approves the annual internal audit report for 2019 and 2020. So we do actually have to vote on this. So if you can pull up your little chat box, I can pull mine up. There are, there's a little poll there. Now, we have done this before, so if you can just indicate for, against or abstain and then submit your vote, and you can only vote once, so if you think you've made a mistake, don't worry. I'll press my little button and then the officers will let us know if everybody's voted.
Chairman, I can see that all members have voted and 100% for the recommendation.
Thank you very much. So we'll just close that little box. So item 9 is on pages 87 to 122, and that's the internal audit plan for 2020 to 2021, and it's Neil again, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as indicated, this is the audit plan for the forthcoming year. The plan's been developed following our usual processes of engagement with directorate management teams who help to determine and frame the focus for the year. We also take on board our own internal risk assessment across the organisation, coupled with review of risk registers and key committees in key strategy documents. The impact of COVID over the last few months has required a slight recalibration of the plan due to the shifting priorities in the new and emerging risks that have materialised as a result of the pandemic. The one aspect of the plan that I would just draw members' attention to is the review that's indicated in the middle of page 98 of your packs. That's a line that allows for a pool of days for assurance work in respect of COVID-19. It's pulling on some of the areas that are alluded to in Annex 1 of that paper, which is detailed on page pages 110 and 111. In what that annex shows are areas that have kind of presented themselves as some of the more significant considerations as a consequence of COVID. The list isn't exhaustive, and I'm sure there'll be other issues that emerge, but that's the kind of list that we're working from at the moment. But as I say, it's always evolving. Equally important to the issues that are raised by COVID is to maintain our focus and our assurance work on the Council's business as usual activities. And I feel that this plan provides a reasonable balance against both. I think this year, probably more so than ever, the plan will need to remain fluid and reactive to the changing needs of the organisation, and will maintain close engagement with directorate management teams across the organisation to ensure that our resource and our focus remains aligned to the key risks and key needs of the organisation. Also attached to the papers is our fraud plan for the year, which outlines our reactive and proactive initiatives, and the list of proactive reviews are detailed in a little bit more detail on pages 119 and 120 of the pack. I think that's the key issues to draw to your attention, Chairman, but obviously, again, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Neil. Would any members like to ask a question? No little hands up. Yes, there's one just popped up now. Councillor Mello.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to raise the issue of where does internal audit fit into the scheme of things in terms of recovering monies that we're expecting in the council? I'm referring, of course, specifically to these alleged grants we've been receiving from the government under the COVID-19 schemes, where we're going to be left with a serious shortfall because these grants are supposedly not appearing. Is internal audit getting involved in monitoring these? Because they will have an impact on the accounting.
Internal audit haven't got any real involvement. It's probably more a question for Carolyn that may be able to answer a little bit more fully on that, Councillor.
Yeah, I agree. It's a question for Carolyn, but I would have thought internal audit would need some assurance when they're reviewing all the accounting procedures. But
Carolyn has indicated that she will speak, so thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you. Councillor Miller, it's not so much that the grants need to be audited. The challenge that we have as a county council is that we have only so far been allocated 3 sums of money by central government. Those sums of money have arrived and are being properly accounted for and dealt with. The challenge that was highlighted within the Cabinet and the Council report is that we are expending far more than the government has currently allocated through grant. So it's not actually an issue for audit because there is no irregularity or issue around the allocation of the funding. It's the fact that the government at the moment doesn't believe it should be allocating the money, and that is very much a political issue between the County Council and central government. I hope that helps.
Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else like to comment or say a few words? I was just waiting for that little hand, Councillor House. I saw it suddenly pop up. I'm sure you've got something interesting to say.
It popped up in a perky little fashion, Chairman. I was just going to agree with Carolyn, really, which is that this is definitely an issue for Cabinet to be chasing Conservative members of Parliament to make sure that the promises that were made by the Chancellor and by the Secretary of State, that costs incurred by local government would be funded, that we had a blank cheque, are honoured, because they're not being at the moment. So in that sense, it probably will come back to us at Audit Committee when we finally have the proof that the Conservative politicians nationally haven't kept the promises they made. Perky little hand.
Yes, perky little hand. Interesting comment. Quite valid, actually. Any other little hands? No? Right. Well, thank you very much for those comments. So the recommendation is on page 87, and it's that the Audit Committee are invited to comment on what you've done and then approve the internal audit plan for 2020-21 and the fraud plan. And this will be a poll. So we've done this before. So if you can click on your little chat box, please. There we go. You can vote for, against, or abstain. And submit your vote. And then I think it might be Katie will tell us if everybody has voted.
Thank you, Chairman. The majority of members voting for, so the recommendation is carried.
Okay, thank you very much. Item 10 now is on pages 123 to 136. And Neil again, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so this paper relates to the Internal Audit Charter for 2020-21. The Charter is a requirement of the Public Sector Internal Audit Standards, which are the standards as Public Sector Internal Auditors we have to comply. And then the document really sets out the purpose, authority and responsibility of internal audit as a function within the organisation. The Charter itself, again through the standards, is required to be signed off by the corporate management team and yourselves as the Audit Committee, and that requirement's an annual one. The document that's in front of you today has been received by the Audit Committee fairly consistently over the last 4 or 5 years. There's no changes to the document this year to that was approved last year, so I don't think there's anything particularly I need to draw your attention to, but obviously if there's anything in the document you have any questions on, more than happy to take any. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. Any questions from any members, please? No little hands. So this is also a poll. So and the Audit Committee invited to comment, which we've done, and approved the internal audit plan. Oh, have I read the right one? Yes, let me just double check. Yes, I have. So can you go to your little poll, please, and vote?
Thank you, Chairman. All members voting for the recommendation.
Thank you very much. So we now go on to item 11, which is on pages 137 to 158. This is the annual governance report. Barbara Beardwell on David Kelly.
I'll be presenting it, Chairman.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So this is the annual governance statement, comes to the committee every year. I'm just reflecting in the moment that it's the 10th annual governance statement I presented to the Audit Committee. The format has remained pretty similar. It'll be familiar to those of you that have seen it in the past. Fundamentally, the report is looking back over the County Council's governance arrangements in the previous year, although there is one section on page 155, which is the action plan for the coming year. Slightly differently this year, we have included some content about the COVID emergency, because it did begin to arise just at the very end of the year in question. And in the actual report itself, we were asked by the Conduct Advisory Panel to bring to your attention a recommendation that was made by the Committee on Standards in Public Life about providing details in the annual governance statement relating to any joint ventures that are operated by the County Council. And you'll see that there are 2, the Kent Commercial Services LLP and the Reading Hampshire Property Partnership, and details of the governance arrangements for both of those are contained in the statement. The action plan, which is a list of activities that the County Council will undertake next year, is again on page 155. And other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
155. Okay, thank you very much. Any member would like to ask a question? Little hand has gone up. Councillor Makata, please.
Thank you. I'm just looking at page 155, and I'm looking at the item 6.6 about governance arrangements. At what stage are we going to get more detail on that? Is that something that we're going to have to look at as part of this process, or is that something that's going to be separate? That strikes me as quite a all-inclusive comment, and I was hoping for something a little bit more specific about what governance do we have to look at in the light of our experience of the last 3 months. Thank you.
Sorry, which exact number are you talking about? 6 point?
Sorry, 6.6.
6.6. Yes, well, that's basically saying that the County Council, we've already made significant changes to our governance arrangements. Those are particularly the arrangements we've put in place for doing remote meetings such as this. And what we're also saying is that we will be assessing how those changes have operated, making sure that they don't create any kind of democratic deficit or whatever. And that will be reflected in next year's annual governance statement. We'll report back on how we think that our response in terms of governance has gone during the COVID emergency.
Thank you very much. Now I have a little hand has popped up. That of Councillor House, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I felt David's pain when he said that this was the 10th annual governance report that he presented. So it begged a question, really, which is, in 10 years of producing annual government statements, has anything ever been included and action arisen that wouldn't otherwise have happened as a general matter of good governance and internal control?
I'm not aware, I can't think of anything offhand, but I think it's actually always very good practice for an organisation to set itself targets that it will clearly hold itself to account for. And I think almost it's the process of going through and identifying actions and making sure that they're being undertaken that provides the assurance that you're going to be delivering improvements. So I can't think of any that we wouldn't have done otherwise, but I still think it's a valuable process.
David, you're a good corporate officer, aren't you? You can defend the line. Well done.
Okay, you're content with that then, Councillor House?
I'll vote against in principle because I think there's a bit of government bureaucracy that we could do without and save ourselves some time and effort.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mitchell?
Thank you. Yes, a very quick question about staff surveys. I see that you did a wellbeing survey beginning of last year, and you've got an inclusion survey that you're just about to do, having done one as a baseline in 2018. That strikes me as quite a lot of staff surveys in quite a short period of time, and they can be very expensive and also quite wearing for staff and the people who are analysing them. I'm just wondering if there's a reason why those are done separately rather than all rolled up together, and how often staff are surveyed generally.
I'm afraid I can't answer the majority of that. I'm simply just presenting the report of what we've actually undertaken. I would just comment that diversity is something that has really risen up our priorities in recent months. Or even longer. So that sort of work is reflecting a greater priority in that area. But in terms of the detail of your question, I'm afraid I can't answer it.
I think
Chairman.
Carolyn might be able to help on that.
Chairman, perhaps I could. We've undertaken, probably it would be one staff survey a year, because we've just undertaken a recent one for all staff around the working arrangements since the outbreak of COVID, the changes in working practices for both those that are working directly in the community and those who have been predominantly working from home since lockdown. We don't use external organisations to undertake the survey. We have the technical expertise internally to both set the surveys up and also to deal with the distillation of the results and the presentation of the report back. So it actually is extremely low cost within our own staffing resources, and we tend to go for one a year because you don't want to be overloading staff with surveys. I strongly suspect we'll end up this year with another one in the autumn around working arrangements, which will include questions around inclusion and diversity and the operating model that we've had in place, depending where we get to by October. I hope that's helpful.
That's very helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm probably reflecting the pain that I'm feeling in my own organisation at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Thacker.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a question of just a presentation for the Audit Committee. Is there any mileage in asking that we have a set of executive bullet points at the top of the report to say how the annual statement scope or content has varied greatly from the previous year's statement?
I think, I mean, we tend to start afresh each year. Obviously, some things are very similar, the way they come up. I think we try and keep the report as short as we can. It's certainly a lot shorter now than it used to be. It used to be sort of double the length. So my inclination is that it should be relatively accessible and should stand alone on each one. But obviously, if the committee feel differently, we can look at a presentational issue.
Thank you. That's a very clear answer, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. No more hands. Now the recommendation is on page 137 that the Audit Committee approves the 2019-2020 annual governance statement, and this is another poll. So if you could go to your little chat box, please, for, against, or abstain if you can't make up your mind. Councillor House.
I never have a problem making up my mind, Chairman. Promise.
Chairman, I can see a majority of members voting for the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, David. Item 12 is the annual Treasury outturn report, pages 159 to 176. So Rob, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Sarfas or Gemma Farley, I don't know which one's presenting this.
Yes, I'll be presenting that, Chairman. And
you're obviously not Gemma, so it must be Rob.
That's right, and correctly pronounce their name as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm here today to talk to you about the Treasury Management Outturn Report. So this is one of the regular reports to the committee that you'll be familiar with, focusing on the Treasury activity in the 1920 financial year. Just start with a little bit of background on page 160, the economic context. You'll be aware that it's been a challenging year, continuing low interest rate environment and the uncertainty of Brexit, then followed, of course, by the impact of the coronavirus pandemic. The financial markets took a big hit in March, and there's been other impacts as well, such as the pool of suitable counterparties to lend to becoming smaller as a result. Table 1 on page 162 gives a little bit of detail on the council's balance sheet position. So you can see that the capital financing requirement has increased slightly. Some external borrowings matured. We've had a reduction in reserves due to the planned transformation activity, and in aggregate, that's a fall in net investments of about £25 million. Table 2 then on page 163. The key thing to highlight here is that there's a difference between Table 1 and Table 2 because Table 2 strips out the accounting adjustments like the fall in fair value for pooled funds from the investment balance. Not a huge amount to say on borrowing on page 164, other than to highlight that the Treasury is consulting on the future of PWLB and Hampshire has responded to that consultation. And to note that where interest rates have remained so low, the advice from our advisors, Arling Close, has been to continue with the internal borrowing policy rather than taking on any additional external borrowing. So if we then move on to Table 4, page 166, and the Council's investments. So the activity during the year was geared up towards being ready to make the early pension prepayment in April. You may recall this was £230 million approximately, and is expected to generate a saving of about £9 million over 3 years, net of investment income foregone. The result of that is shown in Table 4 in terms of the change in the mix of investments. So obviously an increase in short-term balances, largely through the use of money market funds, which are liquid and diversified and minimise the risk associated with investing in individual banks. Table 5 then, page 167, just shows the positive performance of the internally managed investments when compared with other authorities. And you can already see in that column on the right hand side, the rate of return has dropped over the year. Already the impact of the bank cut being felt in March, and this position is getting ever more challenging. So, for example, a money market fund where we may previously have received 70 basis points, now down to maybe 15 and falling further. I won't say too much on the high yielding investments because we'll talk about that in the separate report. But page 167, just to highlight a fall in year of about £22 million in terms of the capital value, 12.8%. Although we will only realise that loss if we come to sell the assets. There's been significant market volatility, equity funds particularly badly hit, the council's own funds down about 20% and 33% at the end of the financial year. And of course, this all happened in March, just before the end of the council's financial year, so no chance for those values to rebound. The flip side of that is that the income returns have continued to be very strong. So a benefit to the revenue budget of about £8.2 million, a 4.65% return. And which leads us on to page 61, paragraph 61, sorry, on page 170, where you can see £13.4 million of income in total generated, average yield of 2.17%, which is an increase both in monetary terms and the percentage return since the previous year. I'll stop there and very happy, of course, to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Would anybody like to ask any questions or make any comments? Nobody? Okay. Well, the recommendation is on page 159. We're just asked to note the recommendation being reported to the Cabinet and the full Council. So we just need a verbal agreement. So if you'd just like to indicate verbally if you're content with this.
Agreed.
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 That's what I like to hear. Well done. Thank you very much. Thank you, Rob. But I think we've got you again. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman.
Item 13. And that's the higher yielding strategy update on pages 177 to 190. So if you'd like to take us through that one, please.
Of course, thank you, Chairman. So this report has been written in response to the request at the previous Audit Committee in February. Members asked for a little bit more information about the Council's higher yielding strategy. So as a bit of background, the strategy targets a yield of around 4% and was introduced as a way to counter the very low interest rate environment that we've been seeing in this country for a number of years now, first beginning in the strategy in 2014. We have to remember that we still need to comply with the SIPFA code, so we have to prioritise security and liquidity before seeking a return, the yield. We do this for security through ensuring that we're willing to hold these investments for the long term so that we can see out any falls in capital value. And from the liquidity perspective, we get this from investing only from the most stable balances, which means that we don't need to sell for liquidity reasons at a loss. Once those two conditions have been met, we then select investments to target the desired yield without taking undue risk. Of course, that doesn't mean that the investments are completely risk-free. We help to mitigate that risk by building up a diversified portfolio as recommended by Arlen Close, rather than holding individual assets. And actually, all of the investments are made only after taking advice from Arlen Close. Table 1 then on page 179 just gives you an overview of the current portfolio as at the end of 1920 with £201 million invested. And despite the fall in capital values that we've seen due to the wider market reaction to coronavirus, Ireland Close do continue to recommend holding these investments. Of course, officers continue to review and scrutinise performance, and so do Ireland Close. And we have also set out in the table on page 180 some of the other options that have been considered and rejected, as that was one of the questions that was asked at the previous committee meeting. I'll just briefly run through some of the highlights then on the performance, and then very happy to take any questions that you may have. So chart 1 on page 183, this is fund level performance versus some of the comparator benchmarks. And one of the points to highlight here for the equity funds that the council's invested in is they may sacrifice some of the potential capital growth by paying out dividends and seeking income stocks compared with the wider market. So they won't be holding things like Tesla, which has seen a big increase in value over recent months, because that kind of stock won't pay out income returns. The Schroders Income Maximiser Fund, I think, stands out on the chart as a particularly poor performer on a total return basis over the 1, 3 and 5 year periods. But then table 2 on page 184 shows that all of these funds are then delivering on their objectives in terms of the income returns, and does highlight the particularly strong income returns from Schroders. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we'll only realise any capital losses if we come to sell an investment. Table 3 then, page 185, focuses then specifically on the council's returns since purchase. As at the end of May, Schroders accounted for £10.7 million of the £14.4 million capital loss. And it's worth noting that overall that's an improvement of about £4.5 million since the end of March. Schroders invest primarily in UK equities, which were particularly badly hit by the pandemic, and they've also rebounded less quickly than other global markets like the US. But we can see, again, the strong performance on the income side and the continued benefit to the revenue budget from that fund and actually all of the pooled funds held by the council. So £18.8 million of income since 2017, an annualised return since 2014 of 4.57%, which is far in excess of what could be achieved from investing in cash, and reduces the savings that the council has to make as part of its savings programme. Although, of course, like any savings made from income generation, you can get variability from year to year, so there is a level of risk there. Table 4 then just shows the difference in returns between the high yielding strategy and the other investments. As a bit of context, there's £171 million invested in pooled funds, bringing in the returns that you can see there, compared with over 400 million in more traditional investments on average during 1920. So quite a stark difference in returns. We do also benchmark ourselves against other local authorities to ensure that we're performing as we would expect to. And table 5 shows a snapshot at 2 periods in time of some of the key indicators there. I'll just finish off by saying there's ongoing monitoring from officers and Ireland Close of these funds, and in terms of the outlook for the future, we have to remember that we're long-term investors and values will be volatile. And over the short term, we're expecting income returns to take a hit, and the Cabinet report in May suggested a figure of about 3.5 million may be lost this year compared with what we would have been expecting. Pooled fund returns, though, do continue to be far in excess of what we could expect from cash, and Ireland Close are very confident that over our investment horizon, the value should recover, with the benefit in the meantime that we'll continue to achieve the income returns that benefit the revenue budget as set out in the strategy. So I'll finish there, and then of course very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob. Would anybody like to ask a question? Yes, Councillor Mitchell.
Yes, a quick question, if I may, Chairman, on page 179. The earmarked funds of or earmarked amount of 235 million. went up to 235 million in 2019, and the total at the moment is 201 million. Is that just because it takes a while to move the funds into that high yield area?
Yes, it's a very good question. It can take a time to make these sort of investments. We wouldn't, on Alan Close's advice, attempt to time the market, but we would also want to make sure, as these are long-term investments, that we were picking the right ones to invest in. And this does also allow us, the investment that the County Council is making as part of the Many Down project is also covered by the allowance within this strategy, so we need to leave some headroom for any investment that's required there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Kemp G.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, we've got some problems here, as I think we all appreciate. As we noted in February, it's quite clear that in terms of the dividend funds, the equity dividend funds, that they were invested in the value end of the stock market, and we could spot what was happening, that although the stock market had gone up in the previous period, the capital value of those funds had not, although the dividend income remained high. And that demonstrated that these funds were invested in the value end of the stock market. And the situation we have now is the last stock market in the world you want to be in is the UK stock market. The last section of the UK stock market you want to be in is the value end of that market. And on top of which, it is confidently predicted, as Rob has, in all honesty and with due credit to him, mentioned, that UK dividends as a whole are going to be, our forecast to be down 40 or 50% this year. So the income is under a lot of pressure, but as I say, in all fairness to Rob, he has highlighted that. But the fact is that if you now look at the property pool funds, these valuations were taken at the end of March, and clearly not only has there been a significant fall in the property value across the UK, but it takes time for these to come through into the valuations. But on top of that, of course, we don't know how bad property rents have been hit as well, and that is something that will only wind down or wind out in the next few months. So long story short, really, there's no reason to panic here at all, as Rob has said, but there will be a prolonged period of underperformance, and there will be a prolonged period of significantly reduced income from these investments, which will make those historic tables look pretty awful, I would suggest. So Rob, long-winded question, but when do you think we'll see some recovery in the income aspects of these funds?
I think if I could answer that question with any real certainty, I'd perhaps be in a different job than I am now. But I would say that from speaking to Arlen Close and our advisors, speaking to the fund managers themselves, they continue to be confident that they can deliver income returns that are getting close to what is described here in the report. On the property funds, we might be looking at something in the range of 80% of what we've seen before. Something like the Schroders Income Maximiser Fund works through a combination of the dividends they generate directly and a covered call strategy. So they sell some of the future potential capital growth and take some income now as a way of delivering that income return. So I think, to be completely honest, something like the Schroders Fund, we are looking at a relatively long-term horizon for that to recover in capital value fully. We may expect the income returns to be back to where they were maybe in 2 to 3 years, depending on how the economy reacts generally. But it's very much crystal ball gazing, I would say, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Councillor House.
Yeah, I think one of the points here is that some of this is an art form rather than a science, and we try to pretend it's a science when it's not fully a science. I thought Mark's comments were, as always, spot on and rather eloquent. We've taken a particular approach here, which is to say that we're going to invest in, broadly speaking, in a pooled way, so that we spread our risk across the market. And that, in the long term, that's a pretty cautious, pretty safe approach, and I'm sure that will happen over time. And the point is, we are looking at long-term investments here, not short-term gains. And there are some bumps in the road, and we've hit a pretty significant bump at the moment. And that's not just one of Hampshire's not-filled potholes. It's something which is going to last for a while, and we don't quite know what the real implication is yet. But that was inevitable given the approach we've taken. The alternative approach, which is the one the council's rejected, which is the one that some of the district councils have taken, is to look at individual assets, which they judge individually and their likely performance on. And you can argue this in both directions. And I know we have here, and I have with Carolyn and Rob at different points in the past. And again, there's no answer because this is an art rather than a science. I did, however, think that one of the reports that went to, I think it was either Cabinet or Council pretty recently, was kind of smug because it tended to imply that the approach that was being taken by some of the districts was less likely to be bulletproof, when actually at the moment it's not proven to be. In another place I won't mention, Eastleigh, the performance actually seems to be performing better than the market. But I'm certainly not taking a smug line on that, because you have to look at this in the long term, and we really don't know what the long term is going to be with some of this stuff. So I'd like to hope that all local authorities, and so this is a slight dig at some of the staff, sorry Carolyn, would take a slightly more balanced view overall about the risks that we're taking in these areas, because we don't really know what the conclusions are going to be, and either approach could be right. At the moment, we're taking a bit of a hit here at Hampshire. That was somewhat inevitable given the approach we've taken, given the wider market performance. But in the long run, it's probably okay. So let's not worry so much about it in that sense, because it'll probably turn out okay. And the evidence in the long run is that it will do.
Thank you. Councillor House. Carolyn.
Thank you, Chairman. I would sincerely hope that no reports I ever put forward would appear to be smug, particularly not about a matter such as this, because you're absolutely correct, Councillor House. There are many different strategies one could deploy, and there's nothing surer than nobody can read the future. We don't have crystal balls. If we did, each and every one of us would not be sitting here today. We'd be rather better off than we are doing something else. So that there is always an element of risk around investment, and therefore one of the reasons we would never be smug is that what goes around comes around, and at some point the market will rise and it will fall, and depending where we're invested, we'll think we're doing okay one moment, and then the next moment we're quite concerned about the picture. So that would be really unfortunate if you took that view, and hopefully that's not the case. In terms of what we're doing here, and you know, we've explained it previously around what we see as being the fundamental difference between a pension fund investment, where we are dealing with £7 billion of very long-term investment for the purpose of paying pension promises. And that's quite fundamentally different from what we're doing in Treasury management, where we're trying to squeeze just that little bit extra from return without sacrificing security and liquidity. And you're correct, we do take a cautious approach. This money is needed, not now, but in the medium term, which gives us the confidence of being able to place the 235 million in a medium-term strategy, and therefore just now we're going through a bit of a dip in capital values. We'll definitely go through a bit of a dip in revenue returns, but our aim would be within the next 7 years, hopefully the cycle comes back up again and we're back where we should be. The only alternative to that, frankly, is putting our money in the banking sector. The banking sector gives really poor return, and it's extremely high risk because we have no protections, as you know, colleagues, from listening to Arlene Close each year. It's a very, very tricky area to be operating in. And fortunately, we've been prudent around not building in significant expectations around those returns. And therefore, when we do have higher returns, it tends to come through in your year-end report around being a fortuitous benefit, rather than when we have a difficult time it coming through as a difficult deficit. So it is always a very, very tricky area, hence the reason we work with external advisors. And at the moment, that's Arling Close, and we retender that advisory service very regularly. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you, Carolyn. Councillor House.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. I just to be really clear, I'm totally supportive of the County Council's approach in this area. I think it's right for the county to take the approach it does, in exactly the same way as it might be right for a different organisation with slightly different objectives to take a slightly different approach. And that's the beauty of local government, actually. And what I'd like to hope is that there's enough sort of mutual respect in the room in the wider sense, that we recognise that different councils will have slightly different objectives and different approaches. Broadly speaking, we need to understand each other rather than knock each other. This is the right approach for Hampshire. It will work out okay, was the message I was given. We just have to accept that there are bumps along the road.
Agreed. Thank you.
That's produced quite an interesting discussion. Does anybody else want to say anything? No more little hands? So if you haven't any more comments, the recommendation is on page 159, and the Audit Committee is asked to note the contents of this report. So if I can just hear your little yeses, please.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed. Okay. Thank you very much. Did I hear a no?
Yes. No. Yes. Yes,
Okay.
I support the.
Excellent. So just making sure you're all still awake, you see. So thank you very much. The next item is item 14, which is the related party transaction disclosures 2019-20 update. And that's on pages 191 to 196. And it's over to you, Anne, I hope.
Thank you, Chairman. Can you see me?
No.
No. I've turned my video on, but it's, oh, I think I've turned the camera around. I do beg your pardon. Let me just, no, it's not going to,
Well, we can hear you beautifully though, and we do have an amazing mug shot on the screen.
So that might be better. I do apologise. Good afternoon. So this report relates to the annual requirement that you'll be familiar with for all county councillors to make a declaration regarding any transactions that they are aware of between themselves and related parties for the previous financial year, the financial year just ended, 1920. And this is an annual process, obviously important as part of our overall governance process to ensure that decisions are made transparently and appropriately. Unfortunately, this report identifies 2 councillors that have not yet responded to actually 4 official requests in order to satisfy this requirement this year. And so I'm happy to answer any questions, but the report does suggest to the Audit Committee that you consider follow-up action, including perhaps referring these 2 councillors to the Conduct Advisory Panel for a breach in compliance with this annual County Council procedure. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Councillor House.
Thank you, Chairman. I think all parties have had councillors on the naughty step on this report in the past, and it's your lot's turn rather than my lot's turn this time. But my wider point really is this is a really bureaucratic process that staff have to go through every year. It wastes a disproportionate amount of time for questionable real benefit. And I know it even takes the director's time up chasing these, because clearly the director wants to make sure that there aren't too many of us reported onto the naughty step. But I just wonder if it's the best way of doing it. I know most, if not all, councils do this or something like this, but a process of self-reporting rather than chasing a paper trail when probably 95% of us each year just return none, doesn't seem to me a desperately efficient way of going about business. Question really, is there a better way we could do this? Or do we even need to do it at all really? In the real world as opposed to the SIPA world?
Carolyn.
Chairman, thank you. Councillor House, I do agree that it's a bureaucratic exercise that unfortunately, because of the audit requirements and the reason that we chase so vigorously is because unfortunately every councillor and chief officer must make a declaration. It's quick, it's simple, so I think we've made it as least bureaucratic as we can. If everybody who received the first email simply answered the question, which is either nothing to declare, or here's the list of 2 organisations I'm involved in, which may give me a conflict, then job done. And to be fair, the vast proportion of officers and councillors do just that. So I'm a bit bemused, I must say, as to why we can't just do that. It takes all of 10 seconds to make that response. I can't stop asking the question. I have to put due effort into trying to secure a response, or the auditors will criticise me for not doing my job properly. Hence the reason we do put quite a lot of wasted effort, because this is time we should be spending doing much better value-added activities, but we do it because we must. And the external auditors will indeed comment on this. And if I didn't do reminders after the first request, the auditors would make very serious comment, because we would have a significant number who hadn't declared. So it's really, asking, and I also include the group leaders. Can't we get through this? Can't I just ask one question once a year, and can't I just have an answer once a year? It doesn't seem a lot to ask, I think. But there you go. If I didn't have to do it, rest assured I wouldn't do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Councillor Mitchell.
It's a very quick question, please, Chairman. What form has the 4 attempts to contact taken? Have they all been by email, or has somebody attempted writing or phoning? I ask because I've chaired one of these gentlemen in a committee, and getting them by email was almost impossible.
So yes, I can confirm that they have all been by email. 2 emails on behalf of Carolyn, an email from Barbara Beardwell as monitoring officer, and also an email from Councillor Evans. They've all been obviously through the official Hampshire County Council email system over quite a period of time, so that we certainly haven't had sort of away responses, but we haven't used additional time to either write in paper post or indeed telephone this year.
And Chairman, I am aware that the group leaders do take this seriously when I involve them, and I know that they do make efforts to make personal contact, and I know that that's by telephone in these instances. So I do strongly believe that they are aware of the request. It's not been a case of not seeing the emails. As Anne says, it's been over a lengthy period of time, and these are their work email addresses, which they are required to check upon. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. Would anybody else like to comment at all, apart from us, our exasperation at it? It's a waste of time, but there you go. I noticed they're both men.
Chairman, the list before this was not just men.
Was it? All right, okay. Well, if nobody else has a question, the recommendation is on page 191, and the recommendation is for the current county councillors who have not returned their 2019-2020 related party transactions declaration to the Deputy Chief Executive and Director of Corporate Resources. Those councillors will be referred to the Conduct Advisory Panel. Now this is an item which requires you to vote. So I think I'd just been told that Councillor Mellor just wanted to have a word, but I can't see his hand. Oh, I can see it now. Oh, and Councillor Kempji. So Councillor Mellor first.
Thank you, Chairman. May I simply suggest, as Carolyn Williamson said, dealt with the leaders on this before, that a phone call from their leader wouldn't go amiss. Give them 24 hours to respond accordingly before the requirement to put them through a conduct advisory panel.
Thank you, Councillor Kempji. Can you hear me? Councillor Kempji.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if Mr. Kelly is still with us, but I think it might be appropriate that members of the Members' Code of Conduct panel abstained in this particular vote. I would feel more comfortable as its chairman if I abstained. For, I think, obvious reasons. I don't know whether other members feel the same as I do, but that would be my personal view. I would like to abstain on this vote.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell.
Yes, on the question that Councillor Mellor raised, I'm satisfied myself that the attempts that have been made to raise them are sufficient. I was worried about the email thing, but as it's been over a prolonged period of time, and as there have been other attempts via other less formal methods of raising them, then they're supposed to be checking their emails. So.
Okay, anybody else would like to contribute? Councillor House.
Yeah, well, I agree with Floss, but for the reasons Mark Kempji has suggested, I've just changed my vote because I'd already voted. The great thing about this poll is you can change your vote from 4 to abstain because I'm on the Conduct Advisory Panel. And just, Chairman, to give you notice, I'm going to have to leave after this item, but serendipitously, my substitute is here, and Councillor Tennant might be able to fill my place, in a very different way, of course.
Oh, nobody could fill your place, Councillor House.
I did say in a very different way.
Councillor Thacker.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it's same position as Councillor Kempji and Councillor House. Do we need a minimum number of votes for this to be noted, accepted, or agreed?
Yes, I was actually going to ask the similar question. If more than half the committee aren't going to vote, whose responsibility is this going to rest on?
Chairman, you'll still have a quorum, so be fine with only members abstaining, no problem.
Okay, so are there any more questions? So item 14, you go to your little chat box. You can either vote for, against, or abstain, and then submit your vote. So is that everybody? Councillor Philpott has a comment, apparently. Councillor Philpott?
Yeah, probably a bit late now, actually, Chairman. I did put the hand up quite a while ago. I think I might have some sort of problem with this facility. Every time I put the hand up, it doesn't seem to register for quite a while. I was just concerned, really. I mean, from the comments that have been made by members, this is a very unusual circumstance where members are being asked to effectively vote for referral of other members in terms of conduct or lack of cooperation and so on. I've not come across anything like that before, and just wanted to establish that constitutionally that is the right way forward.
Could somebody help us on that, please?
I think it's entirely appropriate. What, in essence, the committee are doing is recognising that there is a potential breach of the Members' Code of Conduct. Obviously, it's only a potential breach at this point because there's a Code of Conduct process that has to be gone through. But the Audit Committee is responsible for oversight of governance, and if it's aware of what may be a deliberate refusal to comply with the County Council's policies and procedures, I think it's appropriate for the committee to bring that to the attention of the Conduct Advisory Panel.
Well, I'll accept the ruling, Chairman, but it just seems unnecessary to engage members in that particular process. I voted for the motion because I have no problem. I had no difficulty in responding to the request, and I can't see why any other members should have difficulty in responding to the request either, especially if the request has been made, as I understand it, repeatedly and through different forms. But it just seems an unusual way of going about it. I mean, there are powers that officers have to enforce these sorts of matters without recourse to a procedure like this or a forum like this, and I would have thought that was more appropriate. But I'm quite happy to vote for it if that's the correct procedure.
Councillor Thacker.
Thank you. I lowered my hand after I thought something through, so I apologise.
Okay, Councillor Mitchell.
Yes, I was wondering whether on the next occasion this happens, it might be more comfortable for members if the names of the offenders aren't recorded in the report, whether it's necessary to actually have the names. That would take any personal discomfiture out of the decision making.
Okay, any last comments at all? Because we have all voted. Nobody's changing their vote. You're content with your vote. Okay, so the Katie, is it? Are you content that everything has been done correctly on the voting?
Yes, Chairman. All members that are not abstaining have voted for, so the recommendation is carried with the quorum of members.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. And welcome, Bruce, to the meeting. I'm sure you'll make as interesting a contribution as your predecessor. So we're now on item 15, which is pages 197 to 208. These are the non-exempt minutes of the Hampshire Pension Fund Panel and Board of the 13th of December 2019. If anybody wants to speak about that.
Chairman, it's just the general presentation of the Pension Fund Panel minutes, both exempt and later on we'll come to non-exempt. No comments to make, but happy to take any questions.
Okay, so this is just a verbal noting that you're content with to note the report.
Agreed.
Are you all content? Good.
Agreed.
Good. Everybody okay? Thank you very much.
Yep.
Okay. Next item is item 16. Oh, this is an exclusion of the press and public. So members are asked to resolve that the public be excluded from the meeting during the following items of business, as it is likely in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings that if members of the public were present during this item, there will be disclosures to them of exempt information within paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A to the Local Government Act 1972, and further that in all circumstances of the cases, the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information for the reasons set out in the exempt minutes. So I now have to ask if any members have any concerns. If nobody's indicated that they have any concerns, can I now just ask for the webcast to be ended?